Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Tom Holland's supernatural slasher flick Child's Play, which introduced the world to Chucky, one of our great slasher film franchise villains. So this is really quite I don't want to say a standard slasher flick, but it includes a lot of the elements that are very, very typical of the genre. We have a protagonist who is preternaturally resistant to harm. The vast majority of the murder is done with sort of hand weapons, so this isn't a shoot-'em-up type thing. Chucky's weapon of choice is a knife, but he also uses a hammer. He also uses jumper cables. He does blow up. Eddie Caputo, but that's kind of Eddie's fault because Chucky turns on the gas in the oven in the place where Eddie is staying, and Eddie shoots. So, you can't fault Chucky for that. Yeah, you can. He murders Eddie Caputo. Whatever. Anyway, but the majority of the violence is done in sort of hand-to-hand combat style. You have an extremely unlikely villain that we have a series of people who each has to be convinced that the villain is actually the villain. You have, in this case, something resembling voodoo, but this is 1988, so it's not particularly culturally sensitive. Satanic panic voodoo kind of bullshit going on. Terrible representation of voodoo, not a representation of Satanism, but it's in that sort of same vein of like, oh, satanic cults are running around and they're gonna kill people, whatever nonsense people believed. So you've got these very, very common elements of the slasher flick. But one of the things that Child's Play does that is different from many other slasher films is it capitalizes on the creepiness of dolls, right? Because dolls are, not all dolls, but a lot of times dolls are weird. Dolls are what Sigmund Freud would call uncanny. That is, they look like living people, but they clearly are not. They look enough unlike living people that it can sort of arouse that anxiety where something is not. There's a disconnect between what we would expect and what we experience, and in that disconnect we find ourselves unsettled. This is central to the idea of the uncanny, right? So dolls are or have the potential to be uncanny, which is why they so often show up in sort of creepy, like haunted houses and haunted mazes and things like that, because they look like small people, but they're like faces that cannot reflect emotions, dead eyes, etc., etc. It is unsettling. And so the Child's Play capitalizes on that unsettling quality of the doll. This was, I think, the first slasher flick, at least, that really did that. I think there were previous things in which dolls were sort of haunted or whatever it was, but Child's Play really popularized this notion. So, what happens in the film? We start out with Detective Mike Norris chasing serial killer Charles Lee Ray. Norris ends up shooting Ray a couple of times. Ray realizes he's dying, and so he turns to this voodoo ritual to transfer his spirit into the closest receptacle he can find, which happens to be a good guy doll. Now, the good guy dolls are this sort of chain of sort of Cabbage Patch Kid type dolls, I guess. I don't know. They're child size, more or less, and they have like 3 phrases they can say, battery powered, etc., etc. I don't know if that's what Cabbage Patch Kids were really like, whatever else. But you know what I mean. So, we then shift focus from Ray dying. Oh, by the way, as Ray is dying and transfers his spirit into this good guy doll, this supernatural storm gathers. A bolt of lightning comes through the glass ceiling of this toy store in which he's taken refuge and blows the store up. Detective Mike Norris is just like, well, that's a totally normal thing that's happened, and I'm not going to worry any more about that. And apparently the Chicago Police Department's just like, yeah, that's a totally normal thing. Sometimes it happens. Sometimes lightning blows up an entire building at the exact moment a serial killer is dying in it. So that's a weird thing. That is a weird thing that nobody seems to take that as an actual concern. But we then shift to Andy Barkley and his mother, Karen. Andy's a 6-year-old boy. He loves the Good Guy TV show, and he really wants a Good Guy doll for his birthday. His mom can't afford it. She ends up buying one basically from a peddler. He's a homeless guy who has a cart full of stuff. He happens to have a Good Guy doll, which happens to be the doll that Charles Lee Ray imparted his spirit into. Incidentally, I left this out. Ray had promised that he would somehow get revenge on Norris and on Eddie Caputo, who was his getaway driver, who abandoned him as he was being chased down by Norris. So, long story short, the Chucky doll comes to life. He ends up first killing Maggie Peterson, who's Karen's friend and co-worker. She's taking care of Andy because Karen had to work. Chucky basically knocks over some flour so that she has to clean it up. And then while she's cleaning it up, he gets a hammer, bonks her in the head, and she goes backwards out their 10th story window, or whatever floor they live on. Andy is then suspected of the crime because he was the only person in the apartment. Mike Norris doesn't entirely believe it, but he kind of doesn't see another explanation. Karen doesn't believe that her son is a killer, but then Andy starts being like, yeah, Chucky was talking to me. We were just having a nice little chat. And he was like, yeah, Maggie was a bitch. You got what you deserved. And Karen's like, Andy, what are you doing? Don't say that. That's not good. And Andy's like, I didn't say it. Chucky said it. And everybody's like, kid, stop lying. Lying is not good. So basically, Chucky convinces Andy to leave school and take him across town so he can blow up the house that Eddie Caputo is in. All this crazy stuff. The police then are like, okay, Andy is psychotic, so we're gonna, take him and just, put him in a mental institution. We'll get some stuff sorted out. We're gonna have him stop killing people. Gonna have him stop believing that his doll is alive and talking to him, etc., etc. So yeah, Karen then goes home with Chucky. Finds the batteries still in the box for the Good Guy doll. And she realizes that if it doesn't have batteries in it, it should not be talking. And the Chucky doll does talk. Like it's got its built-in phrases like, "Hi, I'm Chucky. I'll be your friend to the end." Ha ha ha. So it does do what it's supposed to do as a doll, but she pulls the back of it open, looks, oh, there's no batteries. At which point Chucky spins his head around. He's like, "I'm Chucky. You want to play?" And then she freaks out because that is not supposed to happen when it doesn't have batteries, etc., etc. She tries to convince it to talk again, eventually threatening to light it on fire, at which point it attacks her, bites her arm, and then flees. She goes back to the police station, reports all this to Mike Norris, who's like, "Listen, you're nuts. No thank you." And basically this is what happens. He's like, Mike continues to not believe her. She continues to assert that this is what happened until Mike himself gets attacked by Chucky while he's in his car. Chucky tries to strangle him with jumper cables, etc., etc. Then tries to stab him repeatedly. Mike does manage to shoot the Chucky doll, but because it's a doll, it doesn't die. But it runs off. And it goes to see John Dr. Death Bishop, who was his sort of voodoo instructor, I guess. And Chucky shows up in this guy's house, and he's like, "Hey, I got shot. I'm Chucky. I transferred myself into this doll, but I got shot, and it hurts. And I need you to explain why it hurts when it shouldn't hurt, because I'm a doll." And Bishop's like, "You're becoming more human." And Chucky's like, "Well, then you got to tell me how to get out of this body, because I'm not going to live out the rest of my natural life as a doll." And initially Bishop is like, "I'm not going to do that because you're bad and you should be stopped." So Chucky uses his voodoo doll of himself, which apparently he has. I don't know why you would have that, but I also don't know why you would tell a serial killer who's coming to you to learn voodoo shit where you have that thing hidden. But basically Chucky breaks his leg, breaks his arm, then stabs him. Before he dies, Bishop says, "You have to transfer your consciousness into the first living person that you revealed your identity to, which is Andy." And so Chucky has to go basically get Andy and transfer his consciousness into Andy so that he can become a 6-year-old serial killer. Andy is aware that Chucky is coming, thinks Chucky is coming to kill him, and so Andy basically manages to escape from the mental institution, fighting off Chucky, who kills Dr. Ardmore, who's the psychiatrist. Andy flees back to his apartment. Chucky comes after him. He's in the midst of doing this voodoo ritual when Karen and Mike show up and stop him, and they basically have a very extended fight with Chucky. Bishop, before he died, managed to tell them that in order to kill Chucky, they have to basically destroy his heart. So Karen apparently just is a terrible shot because she shoots him in the chest several times and does not hit the heart. They light him on fire, bash him a number of times with baseball bats and whatnot, shoot off his arm, shoot off his leg, shoot off his head, whatever. He just keeps going. He's the Energizer Bunny of small, creepy serial killer dolls. And then finally, because it's got to be a man who saves the day, Mike Norris finally manages to shoot Chucky in the heart, at which point Chucky is dead forever until the sequel, presumably. Yeah. So it's an interesting movie. I will tell you this. I was not particularly scared by the movie. It's yes, it's a slasher flick, but it's kind of corny, kind of campy from the perspective of 2024. I'm sure in 1988 people were terrified and whatnot. So I was not particularly scared during the movie. But interestingly enough, this morning when I woke up, I reached over to turn on the light by the side of the bed, and then I turned back around. And I don't know why I did that necessarily. I guess I was checking to see whether my cat was on the bed. So I turned back around, and for some reason, for a second, I thought I saw Chucky there, which was odd because it wasn't like there was no objective correlative to it, right? Like normally when you see something when you're just waking up or you're half asleep or whatever it is, it's like, oh, there's a fucking monster right there. And it's like a coat on a rack or something like that. There's something that's there that you see and your semi-conscious mind mistakes it. There wasn't even anything there. There was just this weird moment where I was like, oh, fuck, that's Chucky. And then I was like, wait, there's nothing there. Literally nothing there. So I don't know what that was. That was a weird moment for me in my life. It had nothing really to do with the movie. It's not commentary, but it's an interesting thing.